Hello and good evening. Welcome to this Screen Talk, part of Barbican's film season, Inner States, focusing on first-person films. Films which take a journey to the inner sanctum of the self. I am Gali Gold, Head of Cinema at the Barbican, and I have created this program together with Alyssa Lebeau, Professor of Screen Media at the University of Sussex. I would like to thank Sussex Docks School of Media, Film and Music, University of Sussex, for their support of the program. This season was created long before we've heard about COVID-19. The pandemic has shed a new current light on the idea of introspection through film. And we had to postpone the season, which was planned for the Barbican cinemas. Alyssa and I have decided to look out for some short films which exercise the same idea of first-person filmmaking. Films which were made during the global lockdown. Tonight, I'm thrilled to be joined by 4 of the filmmakers behind the shorts we're screening for the rest of this week with the rest of the program on the Barbican Cinema On Demand platform. From Lebanon, we've got Carol Mansour, who've made Video Diary and also My Father. From Kashmir and India, we've got Shahzaib Naik and Seraj Ali, who've made A Season in My Paradise. And from Canada, we have Brett Story, who've made The Cop in Our Heads, The Cop in Our Hearts. Good evening to you all. I would like to start with asking all of you to share in a few words the journey into making these films. When did it become clear to you that you're going to hold up a camera in the way you have done during this recent, most unusual of times? And what is it that you've decided to point your camera onto? And I would like to start with Brett, please, if you can share your journey.
Sure. Thank you. It's nice to be here virtually. So I made this very short film called The Cop in Our Heads and The Cop in Our Hearts. And it was by invitation, actually. I had received a note from a programmer here in Toronto who was inviting, I think he was just trying to stay creative, inviting Canadian filmmakers to make films about quarantine. And this is during the first couple of months of the pandemic when we really were all in a kind of quarantine. And at first I was really resistant, in part because I already resented and still do the kind of retreat inwards that this pandemic is forcing many of us into. And I make nonfiction films precisely because I want to live out in public and not live solely in an interior world. But I had also been noticing a particular kind of phenomena that might be familiar to some of you in the places that you are, which is that as people were finding different ways to digest their fears. And one of the ways that people were around me, even my neighbors and friends, were dealing with their fears was to become very chastising of others, and even going so far as to, in many cases, calling the police or calling these kind of snitch lines that are being set up when they saw other people doing activities that made them fearful or that seemed irresponsible. So I decided to make a short film that was a kind of meditation on how we can internalize in our own selves and our own orientation to each other in times of fear. So that's what the film became.
Thank you. And I would like to move now to our filmmakers from India and Kashmir, Ali and Shahzaib. And you actually made your film before COVID, but we as programmers found it fascinating as it's dealing with that experience of lockdown, albeit from a different perspective, very recent one. Can you tell us a bit about that?
You want to take it, Seraj?
I think Shahzaib should go ahead with this.
Yeah. So back last year when I don't think if everyone knows this, but when Article 370 was abrogated from Kashmir, it sort of pushed people into a lockdown, I think, which was much more severe than what COVID has brought people in people's life. So when me and Seraj, we were brainstorming and trying to come up with the idea for our film, uh, one thing both of us agreed on was that we were fed up with the kind of media and content that was being created around the Kashmir issue. So we just wanted to do something different and sort of try to recreate the experience of a lockdown which Kashmiri people were going through back then. So it was a very fascinating experience for us because the film evolved and took kind of its own journey, and it became what it is right now. It was quite a journey. So yeah.
And I think the bedrock of our film was the idea that we wanted to bring that experience of a curfew, of a militarized imposed curfew, and try to see what an Indian who has not gone through the situation ever in their lives would react to a situation like that. And so it opened an entirely new and nuanced line of discovery that was not being traversed before, I believe.
Thank you. That line of discovery you're talking about and state sanctions in action is not foreign, obviously, to Carol Mansour, who is joining us from Beirut. Carol, you took the camera when in the course of the lockdown, and you obviously took two very different trajectories in the two films we present in the program. Can you tell us about those?
Yeah, the first film, which was Video Diary, was a Danish production house asked 5 Lebanese filmmakers to do in 1 week a 5-minute short film on the lockdown. But even before having this, being a documentary filmmaking, I just, took my phone. Actually, everything is filmed on my phone, and I started filming the city, the empty streets, and then I had a week to come up with an idea with the text, and we were not allowed to use any external music or any. We had to do it on our own without any help. I enjoyed it a lot. I actually enjoyed the first lockdown in Beirut. The city was calm. Beirut is a very harsh city. So this was my first video. The second one came because of my father passed away from COVID in Canada. And I decided that first of all, I wasn't able to go see him. And then even if I was able to see him to travel, I wouldn't have been able to go and visit him. So I decided to mourn him, and to this was my way of, paying a tribute to him. We were very, very close. We had a very nice relationship, and it was just very hard, seeing him going away without me being next to him. So I spent like 2 weeks going into my archives, pictures, videos of him, and I did my tribute to my father. So this was, and it's like you said, Gali, two totally different films, but both deal with the same pandemic. So, yeah.
In such a powerful way, if I may add. Few of the films that we've selected for the Inner States program are focusing on the experience of confinement, from Alatantu, God's Will, by the late David Akar, who is exploring his father's imprisonment in the notorious Camp Borio in Guinea, through Chantal Ackerman, voluntary confinement in a Tel Aviv flat, where she contemplates her relationship to Israel, her Jewish identity, and also her familial ties, all the way to Jafar Panahi, who has made the exceptional film This Is Not a Film, documenting a day of incarceration in his flat while under house arrest warranted by the Iranian government. What do you think the recent lockdown experience, this particular confinement, has enabled you to explore in your own filmmaking? And let's start now. Let's remain with Carol.
I'm sorry, but I lost the question. I lost the connection, so I just heard, let's remain with Carol.
Oh, okay. I'll ask the question and again and move to Brett, and then you can have a bit of time to think about it.
Sure.
Basically, I've given a few examples of films that we present in the program, including Chantal Ackerman and Jafar Panahi films, who all have focused on confinement. And I was asking what this particular experience of confinement, be it voluntary or not, this time obviously we're in a global lockdown or enforced one by the government, like in the Kashmiri experience, what it enabled you to do as filmmakers. And Brett, can you talk about that a bit? And Carol will come back to you later.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's for me, that's a really hard question because I'm so fixated on what it's not enabling me to do. In a lot of different ways. I mean, I think it compresses time in such an intense way. It's not just about being confined in space, which is its own limitation. But for me, I have a 16-month-old baby. I teach full time. So there's a way in which the shrinkage of space has also meant a compression of time, such that I have a hard time even gathering my own thoughts. And I find that really frustrating as a filmmaker. Part of my own practice is not just to explore the world, to be a deep observer of the world outside of myself, but to then reflect on the relationship between what I'm seeing and already existing belief systems. So, I mean, I do think that there's in terms of my actual practice, it's certainly making me think a lot more about the texts that are available to us, the news media that I'm consuming, the books that I'm reading, the way in which the immediate material through which I know the world in a refracted way, and thinking about how to use some of those materials in my practice, but also how frustrating it is to only know the world in those terms. And I think a lot of my own films are born out of certain frustrations. So I'm sure, or I at least hope, that new creative strategies will come about as a result of these frustrations.
Seraj, Shahzaib, do you want to share that? Obviously, that was not, it was a slightly different experience, but as you said, you shared that as an imagined space, possibly, for your friends and colleagues in New Delhi, and then it became all more familiar global reality. I don't think we can't hear you. Can you start again, please?
Yeah. I think when we started filming, and this was in November, I don't think we ever realized that our film would almost become prophetic in the way that it was telling the story of a lockdown. And I think what we were arriving at was from a very different end. We were imagining a city that was not in lockdown in the middle of November. And we were, as filmmakers, trying to imagine what it would be like to go around with a camera, to talk to people about this imagined lockdown. And I think the experience was something that Shahzaib personalizes more than I do. So I think Shahzaib would take over from here on that.
Yeah. To add to what Seraj said, it is a pretty big challenge to create a lockdown, because if we were to shoot right now and start filming right now, I think it would have been really, really easy to imagine to film Delhi in a lockdown setting. Back in November, I don't think anyone had even heard of COVID-19. Or anyone had ever thought that there'd be a lockdown. So, as Seraj said, it was like a prophecy what we shot. So both of us, we were, kind of joking amongst ourselves that it was so difficult to make people imagine that they'd be in a lockdown like this, because I used to tell him that never in a million years will anyone have to live like this. And we didn't know, like 5 months later, it would be a reality. So it came from a very personal space. Yeah. The film came from a very personal space, because growing up, I've experienced such lockdowns. And so I kind of had an idea of what to shoot. And it was a bit difficult because Delhi never sleeps. It's a city that always awake. So it was hard to create a lockdown. Yeah.
I was just about to ask how you managed to get those scenes where the streets are empty. that are just, unimaginable, and then I moved to Carol Covidio Diary, where you see Beirut equally kind of, hustle and bustle all around 24/7. And here you are in lockdown. What did this enable you to do as a filmmaker? I mean, Brett was talking about frustrations, but also possibly, new creative ways. How do you feel about it? How did you feel during the filmmaking of both films?
We are here in a totally different mindset as everybody, because of like the lockdown was a few months ago, but as if years have passed. Because the situation is so drastic and dramatic in Beirut, because of the explosion, because of the corruption, because of the economic situation, and so COVID is really not in the picture anymore. So when I'm, like when you were talking about COVID and in India and it's like here life is as usual, more or less. So you're taking me back, not very long, not very far away, but still as if it was in a different life. I feel like it was totally different. The atmosphere was different. It's very difficult for me to remember what we went through during the lockdown, because we are so far away from this right now. We're dealing with so much problems, humongous problems, that I look back at the Covidio, the first one in March, in April, and I wish we were back that time. So
I wonder, so many people during that experience of the last few months, and I'm talking about people that are not necessarily filmmakers or creative people, were talking about the way that experience make them look at the world differently, make them think differently, make them experience things differently. And I'm trying to gauge how, as filmmakers, it maybe informed your practice or the way that you approach that gaze behind the camera. We all talk about filmmakers who actually, in that moment, chose to make films about themselves and their place in that context, which is, only one way. Brett, you were talking about the frustration about actually needing to look in when you always want to look out, and you actually found a way to look out while looking in. But I'm interested in that place. And I don't know, Carol, if you felt that there was something during that. Yeah.
Definitely, because all the films I worked on, the documentaries, were not about me. I have difficulty usually talking about myself, and as if something has opened up. I work on lots of human rights issues, refugees, poverty, women's abuse, and it was the first time that I had to talk about me. And I don't know, it definitely, maybe it made me more mature. I don't know, I'm almost 60, but still I feel that I have learned a lot about myself during this time.
That's interesting. You talk about the difficulty of talking about yourself, and I'm always quite curious about that difference between navel gazing and that introspective look that all these films enable, yours as well as the others in the series, I believe so, that makes them actually so relevant and so in their authenticity, so meaningful to others that won't necessarily know you or ever know you personally. And I wonder if and Brett, maybe you can talk about that, as you talked about the frustration earlier. What do you think is the difference between the navel gazing and a film that actually is all about the self but opens up to others?
Oh, that's such a good question, but also such a hard question. I mean, I'm less interested. I think I have the same problem as Carol. I have a really difficult time making films about myself, in part because I don't have. I feel like it requires some perspective to understand what's of value, what's valuable enough to share with the public. And I don't know. I don't believe that everything that happens in one's interior life or in one's domestic space needs to be shared with a public or has a public value. And I've never been able to figure out what of my own experiences needs to exist as a thing called a film. But I do think that I'm very interested in how the world never appears to us as it actually exists. It always appears to us through our own experiences and ideology and political baggage. And so that part of the being being embodied is very interesting to me. What our inclinations are, what our instincts are towards the world, where do our ideological hangups come from, and inscribe themselves on our interpretation of the world. And so even just this sort of experience of being very localized. I mean, I don't think I've thought so much about being in Canada in my adult life. But there's something about the borders being shut, the way in which we're all so aware of our national response to this crisis, that I've become very aware of being a citizen of a country in a way that I haven't before. Maybe that's a privilege. But it also makes me feel like there's a loss there, because I feel even less aware than I usually am of what's going on in other contexts, like India and Lebanon. And so I do think that there's something really important and interesting in the interplay between one's subjective experience and how one continues to receive and be a sort of receive information about and be a citizen of the world. And I do think that there's something unique about cinema that lets us kind of grapple with that challenge. So maybe we're going to see more responses and more inclusions of subjective experience in our cinematic objects in the coming years.
In a very cinematic way, I should say, for all of you. Before I move to other responses to the question, I want to remind our audience that they can ask questions themselves, which I will take in a minute, and they just have to add them into the comment box, either on YouTube or on Facebook. So Seraj and Shahzaib, what's your how do you see that fine line, and I don't know if it's so fine, between the introspection and something that actually opens up through the very personal experience?
If I may take that before Siraj does, I think, especially in our film, because it was on a subject which was so personal to me, I don't think there's any line there. I mean, we make it. I think I've made it pretty clear in my talks with Siraj and through the film also, that it is a personal experience. I've tried to, make the film in such a way that it comes across, because I've lived through whatever I'm saying. All 11 minutes of the film are personal, pretty personal. If not directly impacted on me, but something that I've heard or picked up while growing up, something on a subconscious level, or something that I've heard or seen, or my relatives or someone else I know has gone through. And because this is more or less our first film, so I don't know how I will react when I make a film about something which is not about myself. So I've made one film and that is about myself. So,
and I would like to congratulate you, because I think it's it's a fantastic achievement. Nobody would believe you. It's you first.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
If Seraj
Carol,
wants to add something.
Seraj, would you like to add something to that?
I mean, when we began working on this film, and there were several ideas on how we're going to go about talking about this experience. But when Shahzaib started to write, and we started to sort of go through these lines that he's written, that he wanted to sort of use and interlace with the visuals that we were filming. I think at that point it just struck like lightning, that we just realized that this is really a personal film. It's more than the best way to talk about it is to sort of talk about it in the way that a person in Kashmir would feel like. And so in many ways, the poetic lines that Shahzaib put out, I would read those and it would fall like, you have to film something equivalent to what he's saying. And that's like, I think that's a huge task to do, because there's no way you can match what he writes with what, with visually what you can bring up. I do think that this is perhaps the best way to talk about the crisis, because we've had a lot of conversations about Kashmir and the curfew, but we really need to start scratching the surface in a different way. And I think that was the intention that we were following through on this.
And it enables, I can talk about myself as a member of the audience to connect in such a genuine way to something that is, an experience that happens thousands of miles away from here. Carol, you took us to one of the most difficult of journeys, the loss of a parent, and the loss of a parent while you were so far away. And as you say in your film, my father, on his own, you can't be there in the way that probably all of us imagine ourselves wanting to comfort and pay tribute to our dear ones. Such a personal experience. What made you open it up, and what do you think made this more than just an introspective personal journey?
Let me go back to the personal. I find that I cannot talk about myself, because I find that what I'm going through, everybody is going through. So I find it a bit, like, why is it so important for me to say something when everybody is feeling the same way? But the film about my father, I don't know why I had this urge to talk about my father, and to talk about, maybe because he passed away from COVID, so it was more like a universal issue. I'm not the only one who, I think, lost a parent, from COVID, and me being away. So I thought it was also a good way of, dealing with this, and letting everybody who went through the same experience, identify with. But definitely, it's not easy to talk, the first person. Now I'm working on a film on the explosion that happened in Beirut, and I'm having difficulties because I feel a bit ridiculous, like it has to be personal, but at the same time, I think every single Lebanese in Lebanon or outside Lebanon is feeling exactly the same way as I am. So I'm having difficulty with the text. I don't want to sound like it's me, but at the same time, it has to be me. So I don't know. It's tough. It's tough to talk about oneself.
It's a very daring choice, I would say. Someone that is hiding behind the screen and just a viewer. But I think it gives a really unique way of engaging with things that are so relevant, like you're saying, to all of us, no matter what background we come from. If we are able to look through your eyes and the sincerity of the journey you're taking us on, and make it relevant. And this is whether you're experiencing the thing firsthand or not. And I think that's the power of cinema, and that's the power of all the films that
absolutely
are in the program. I think our audience is very quiet today, so I'm going to be left with one more question. This is quite fun because I've got plenty. In one sentence, because we're coming towards the end of this fascinating discussion, do you think that the recent experience of lockdown and the pandemic has changed the way you are making and going to make films, or in a way, the way you look at the world? Brett, shall we start with you.
I mean, yes and no. I think that grief is very instructive, and I think that I feel a lot of grief, even from the relatively privileged vantage of Toronto. A grief for a social world, a grief for human touch, a grief for cramming together in cinemas and in dinner parties, and a way of understanding ourselves as interconnected rather than siloed. And so I think for me, it just helps me recall why I make films in the first place, which is it's a kind of device to connect, a pretext to interact with strangers and beloveds. And I feel like it underscores that what I want to fight for as an artist and also as a citizen of the world. So I don't know if that will change the way I make work, but it'll certainly, it has lit a kind of fire under me.
Thank you. Seraj and Shahzaib?
I mean, I think we both bring two sets of experiences to this. And for me, this is the first time I've ever seen a lockdown. I've ever lived through this period of time. So it does change the way I think about the way we'll be going around filming. And I think it's become more personal now. I think our interactions with those interviewees and those subjects and to even go around the city now, the interactions feel more personal, because you've not seen people for quite a period of time. And when you have seen them, there are these social barriers. So I think in that way, when you sit down and look at them through the lens of a camera, I think the empathy there and the need to connect with people is far greater. And I think that will be reflected in the film. But I'm sure for Shahzaib, that's starkly different because he's seen something like this before as well. So Shahzaib.
Yeah, I think I don't know if this will impact me as a filmmaker, but I think as a person, it's impacted me more. It's made me more aware of my privilege. That I was I was able to sort of live inside a bubble through all more than now 5 months I've been inside my home, and I wasn't forced to go out of my home for anything. I had everything. So even though I was aware of my privilege, but I think this has made me aware of my privilege more than anything else could have.
Thank you.
I personally don't think it will change anything in the way I make films because the films I work on usually are very intimate and I feel very close to the people I work with and I interview and I work with the underprivileged population. So I don't think it will change anything. No, not for me.
So just keep doing great films, Carol. We'll be
Thank
happy.
you. Thank you.
Well, I would like to really thank all of you for taking us on a trip behind the scene of your films and for your films that are on the Barbican Cinema on Demand platform till the end of this week. The whole program is available still to our audiences in the UK and Ireland till the end of this week. And I would also like to know that some of the shorts that we have in the Lockdown States program is actually coming from Toronto, like Brett Story's film that is available on Stacey Donen Initiative, Greeting from Isolation, that is available worldwide on the web. One thing I would say in gratitude for this medium is that we managed to get all of you from really all corners of the world to be here tonight. Thank you, and thank you to our audience.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good night and goodbye.
Have a good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.